Good evening, everyone, English teachers and English lovers. We are happy to be here again for another event. And even happier today because we have Professor Leslie Barratt with us, and it's a pleasure to have her here to share her knowledge with us. We are delighted to have her here. I'm Smara. I'm a professor of language and literature at EFRS Canoas Campus, and I'm helping once again with one more session of teacher continuing education. And Ellen Caroline Melo de Oliveira, who is partners representative and an ESL teacher in San Francisco de Paula, and also who works for Cone University in the USA. She is going to act as a mediator again. I'm going to introduce Leslie a little bit better, and then, Leslie, I'm going to hand over to you, all right?
All right.
So for you to know a little bit more about her, Leslie is a professor emerita of linguistics at Indiana State University, having taught from 1980 to 2015, first in the English department and then in the Department of Language, Literatures, and Linguistics, where she was chairperson, with graduate degrees in linguistics and education. Dr. Barratt taught in primary education, undergraduate and graduate linguistics, ESL, EFL, TSL, and TFL. Barratt was Fulbright Senior Lecturer in Hungary and China, so she is a globetrotter as well, I believe. I'm professor of graduate school at Rajabhat, I don't know if it's correct, sorry, University, Thailand. A lifelong language learner, she investigates language variation and or changes that challenge learners. With recent research concerning World English and ongoing changes in English. Welcome, Dr. Barratt.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. Muito prazer. And I see some of my friends are saying hi to me. So, tudo bem. I hope you're all well. Let's go ahead and start the PowerPoint. And what I want to talk about is something I think most teachers have, which is a lack of confidence, both about their English and about their teaching. And my title, can you see the PowerPoint? There it is. Gaining confidence about your English and your teaching. I actually am going to reverse the order and talk about teaching first and then talk about English. When I made up the title, of course, English is the thing most people are sort of more or less confident about, but that's, I guess, why I want to end with it. So let's go ahead to the first slide. And I want to start with not teaching or English, but with cooking and make an analogy here about chefs. And I know, a lot of people around the world don't cook, but we all know what good food is. And we've all experienced good cooking, in the churrasco. You've got wonderful chefs. And so I want to ask the question, what makes a great chef? Is it the approach, the method, the techniques, the materials, or something else? And you can see where this is going if we ask the same question about teaching. So let's go to the next slide and look at approaches. My husband and my son both were Boy Scouts, and they learned during that time how to make a campfire called a teepee campfire. I don't know if any of you have ever seen such a thing, but you take the sticks in order to make a fire and you make them in the shape of a teepee. And they used to have contests with each other who could make the most elegant looking teepee and whose would light fastest and whose would stay longest in order to make a cookout, a barbecue. And on the other side of the coin, you have the other picture, which is somebody just gets out of their car, looks around for something to cook with, finds an old can, and starts building a fire that way. and using whatever is around, whatever is there. In both cases, the food can be delicious. The food over an open fire is delicious no matter how you approach the cooking. Go ahead to the next slide. And the same thing can be true in approaches to teaching. You can see me in both of these pictures. I've taught many different approaches. The one on the left is much more of a communicative approach where we have students talking with each other and the other teacher who's standing up and I standing up in the background are just kind of facilitating, making sure the groups are staying on task and so forth. I think you're very familiar with this kind of teaching, this approach. But I've also taught lectures, and right now I'm kind of doing a lecture, although I want it to be a little interactive a little bit later. This was in a junior high school or middle school in Turkmenistan, and I was lecturing to 100 boys, and all of them had great English. They would stand up and ask questions, and they really their English was good. The English in the communicative approach was good. You can learn a language through many different approaches, and your English can be fantastic. So let's move to methods. I know you've had things sauteed in the French style, and probably there are many wonderful Chinese restaurants in Porto Alegre at least, and Chinese stir fry in a wok. And either way, the vegetables can be great. So let's look at methods for teaching. The next slide. There are many different methods, and I just chose 3 here to illustrate. TPR, or total physical response, silent way, or PPP as it's known, presentation, practice, performance. All of these are different methods. If you don't know them, I can answer questions about them later. But people have been using these methods for different kinds of teaching, and in all cases, you can have good learning occur. So let's move to techniques. We're now building down to the nitty-gritty, from the broad approach to the method to now the little technique. We can steam things, or we can grill them. Probably like fish, you could steam fish, you could grill fish, and it can taste delicious either way. What about teaching? Let's go, techniques of teaching. I've used many times a technique called think, pair, share, where you have students first think of what they want to say or their answer or what they think the problem is, and then they share it with a partner, and then they share out with the rest of the class. You can have everybody share out, or you can ask for volunteers from the pairs to share out. That's a technique to get students working together and to get them thinking and reflecting. I've also used drills, especially in the early days of my teaching in the 1970s, before some of you were born. And I know you're probably familiar with the substitution drill. You know, I can't really read it on the screen here, but you probably can. You know, I bought the ice cream, she bought the ice cream, he bought the ice cream, and so forth. And the students basically learn by repeating after you, or expanding on what you've said, or transforming it in some way. And students have learned English on other languages, many languages, through these techniques and other techniques. So let's move to the next slide and look at materials. We can cook in a kitchen, a cooking area that has very, very few implements, no real technology. The open fire in the first slide was a good example of that. Or you can cook in a very modern kitchen. But the food can be fantastic in either one. And the same goes for teaching. Let's go to that slide. The materials of teaching, you probably all remember blackboards. Maybe they were green or chalkboards, or the whiteboards that came after with markers. We can have that. We can have no technology, no blackboard at all. Or we can have the most modern, up-to-date computers. And these on the right are not the most modern ones, but they are fairly recent. And students can learn either way. I mean, people learned languages not just for centuries, but for thousands of years using not even blackboards, just using books or just listening and just speaking. So let's move on to the next thing. So my question ultimately is, well, what makes a great chef or a great teacher? Is it, if it's not the materials and the techniques and the methods and the approaches, then what is it? And I would contend that it's a few things. You may add some others, but I would say that a lot of it is caring, being what I call inside and outside of the experience, adapting, and modeling learning especially. And I'm going to discuss each of these in more detail. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll talk about caring. And I want you to think about this. Think for a moment. Do you show that you care about your students? And think about, how do you show that? Do you ask them about their family? Or if they've been ill, do you ask them how they are? Do you care that they didn't sleep well last night, or that someone in their family had COVID? Do you show that you care about English? Do you show them some of the things that you've found in English that you think are beautiful? Maybe a poem or a movie or a song or a word. And do you show that you care about your students' learning of English? That you really want them to love English and care about English and learn English the way you do. If you do these things, then you show that you care. And that's a very, very important part, I think, of being a great teacher. Okay, next slide. This one is about being inside and outside, and you might wonder what I mean. But if you think about a film, for example, you have actors in a film, and you're an actor in the class. You are a participant in the class. You are inside it. You are playing your role as the teacher. You're paying attention to the students. You're listening to them. You're talking with them. You are doing the teaching and participating inside. But you're also watching that movie or that film, watching the action while you're doing it. And you're observing how the class is going. Am I going to have time for the last activity that I planned? Are all the students getting what I think they should be getting? Are they learning through this activity? Are they bored? Sometimes even, did my joke go over well? This kind of reflection and watching what you're doing, I call being outside while you're teaching. And you kind of need to be both in order to be an effective teacher. If you're too much involved in the process, you might run out of time. The hour goes by too fast. You weren't watching the clock. And if you're only outside it, observing, then you're not really paying attention to the students and their needs. And sometimes you are just inside or just outside, but you try to be both. Okay, the next slide. You also, to be a great teacher, need to be able to adapt. So if the power goes out in the building, take them outside. That happened to me one time, the very last class of a semester. the power went out in our building. Our building had no windows in the classrooms. So we had to go outside. That was a hard way to review for the final exam, but I had to do it. Another thing that has happened to me is that I'm teaching a class where I really want to use pair work and group work, and the classroom that I was given had seating like that on the picture, in the picture on the right, theater seating, what we call, where you have to climb up the stairs, and it's very hard for students to move around. To do pair work is okay, but doing group work, doing walking around kinds of activities was very difficult. I did have them do it, but it was not easy. You have to be flexible. You have to figure out, okay, how can I do this? Can I have them turn around and face the other row behind them? Okay, next slide. We also need to model our learning. And this is important. You can see in these two pictures, I'm actually in both of them. I'm sitting down in the top one, and I'm learning from someone else's presentation. And in the bottom one, I'm actually presenting in Porto Alegre, I believe, in 2002 or so. And so other people were doing the learning. We need to model successful learning. We need to show students that we're learning, that we're still learning. I do it even with English. When I was teaching English, I would show them things that I was learning, maybe not about English, but sometimes yes, but also what I was learning about other languages. So I would bring in an example from a language I was learning and try to explain to them, you know, something of the difficulty I was having, because I wanted them to see that I struggle too, especially at the beginning with the language. And you want to model that you're still learning the rules. You know the rules better than they do, but there are so many rules of a language, rules not just of the grammar, the syntax, or pronunciation, but also rules of politeness, rules of pragmatics, when to apologize for something, how to apologize politely. These are things that vary and change, and therefore nobody can ever learn them all. But you can model that you're trying to learn them, and you can model that you know the ones that you know that they don't yet know. And of course, we have to model lifelong learning. So students sometimes can teach us, talking just now, you know, if you're teaching Spanish speakers, then they can help you learn Spanish. And that makes them happy, because then you're learning their language and they can see that you're a learner as well as a teacher, and they're being the teacher for you. And that's great. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is we're now switching from teaching to language ability, and what makes someone good in a language. Do you feel that you're good enough? What is language ability anyway? So I want you first to ask, if you're all native Portuguese speakers, which I think you are, how do you feel about your Portuguese? Maybe nobody's ever asked you that before. What do you like about it? What do you dislike? If you're a gaúcho or a gaúcha, do you like the fact that you sound like a gaúcha? Do you dislike it? Do you like the fact that you sound like you're from a certain age group? How do you feel about your English? Again, what do you like? What do you dislike? Do you like that you sound like a gaúcha in your English? If you like it in your Portuguese, what would be a reason to dislike it in your English? That's kind of a contradiction, right? So let's talk a little bit more about language go on to the next slide. And I want to point out that English cannot be completely learned. Nobody masters a language. You cannot know everything. People often ask me, what's the etymology, the history of a certain word in English? I don't know all of them. I can make a pretty good guess very often because I studied Latin and Greek and Sanskrit and some other ancient languages, and I know the history of English, or a lot about the history of English. I don't know everything because you can't. But English cannot be completely learned. No language can. You do not know every single Portuguese word either. You do not know everything about every Portuguese word. And nobody can know everything about English. And there are two reasons why this is true of every language. One is that languages keep changing. And the other is that languages vary. There's variation in every language. In English, this variation is both local and global. In other languages, it may not be quite as global. But we talk about world Englishes because we talk about the globality of English, that it is spoken as a second or third or fifth or 10th language in most parts of the world. So how can we possibly know all of it? And what does this mean for your English? Let's go to the next slide. So I want to give you some examples of why English or any language is very local. And these are some examples of it, but the reason a language is local is because you learned it or acquired it as a young child. You acquired your Portuguese, and I acquired my English from the people around me in a very local place. And even though I acquired it from, say, my family and their friends and neighbors and school first, I still don't speak the exact same English my parents spoke. I don't speak the exact same English my sister and brother speak because I've moved to different places and I've interacted with other people from them. My father spoke a very New York English, a Brooklyn English, from Brooklyn, New York. A very strong Brooklyn accent, but also the way he used the grammar, very Brooklyn. And my mother moved around New York City quite a bit in different parts. So hers was a little bit more generalized, but her family came from Ukraine and Belarusia. And so she spoke with a very different ethnic background from my father. And when she moved out to California, she still, in her older years, still spoke with a very strong New York accent. And she used different vocabulary. She used pocketbook. I used purse. So let's look at some examples that are here on the slide. In many parts of the Arabic-speaking world, people say "in the other hand," where the rest of most of English countries say "on the other hand." On the one hand, on the other hand. They say on the one hand, or in the one hand, in the other hand. Does it matter? No. But it is a characteristic that identifies that as a localized English. I found in a study I did probably 20 years ago that many of the younger generation in the US don't say something happened by accident. They say it happened on accident. I don't know the reason for this. Nobody does. But possibly it's because of on purpose. I didn't do it on purpose. I did it on accident. But in any case, their language, my daughter's language, my son's language is different from mine. They both use on accident. I say by accident. In Korea, people have clipped off the end of apartment and they just call it apart. But in the US, people have clipped off the end of dormitory and call it a dorm. In Brazil, many of you recognize this example. It's quite common to say, "Teacher, I have a doubt." In other parts of English, people would say, "I have a question." This is a noun, and a lot of Brazilians use a different noun. It's perfectly okay. It's just a different noun. The same thing happens in the US with words for soft drink. And the map shows you how varied this is. People say, I say soda. I don't say I need to buy a soda, but you know, I want to buy a soda, maybe. I don't really drink soda, so I don't say it. But people in Indiana often say pop. I want to buy pop. And many people, you can see, the purple areas say, I want to buy Coke. And they don't mean Coca-Cola. They mean any kind of soft drink. They could have orange or Sprite or root beer or something and still call it a Coke. So these are local. I've got one more example on the next slide. This one I think is kind of funny because in Indiana, where I taught for 36 years, the picture on the left is what they call mango, where the rest of the world would say that it's a mango is what you see on the right. But in Indiana, they call that a fruit mango, not a mango. So here is a very localized form of English, just in one word, one noun. Let's go to the next slide. So because we speak very locally, because we speak our own English or our own Portuguese, our own idiolect, we need, as speakers, both to understand the local norms, what's used locally, because we want the local people to understand us. Children want their family to understand them. So we need to know the local norms. But we also, especially as we get older, we need to negotiate meaning across Englishes. This is as we move out into the world, as we become global, as we perhaps travel to other countries, you need to be able to negotiate meaning globally across Englishes. When I lived in Malaysia for 4 years recently, we just left in August, I had to learn a lot of forms of Malaysian English in order to negotiate meaning. I learned something I had always grown up saying okra as a vegetable, little green vegetable. And in Malaysia, they call it lady fingers, which I use for a certain kind of biscuit. But they call okra lady fingers, so I had to order lady fingers when I wanted them. Let's move to the next slide. And my point here is you need to own your own English. Kurt Cohn gave a wonderful presentation at TESL in 2016, and he made the point very clearly. He's from Germany. He lives in Germany, in Tübingen, and he said, learners of English are speakers of English. And I agree with him. Learners of English are speakers of English. There's not a point of saying, oh, I'm only learning English. I'm speaking English. And no one's English is the same as anyone else's. Everybody speaks a different English. Because of that, everyone can be creative in the language and add to English, contribute to its development. The next slide will show you that in a very clear way. Here are some famous writers whose first language was not English, and yet they won Nobel Prizes in literature or Pulitzer Prizes. And while this is the very top of English, getting an award for writing in English, everybody can improve the world and improve and broaden the language by adding to it. Shakespeare added many hundreds of words to English. And many of these people, Samuel Beckett and others, also have added many, many words to English. Let's move to the next slide. So how do we do this? Well, I call it creative pedagogy. That means, or creativity pedagogy, which means you have to let students become creative. You have to encourage their creativity instead of rejecting it. One way, an important way, is through translanguaging, and I'll explain these all in a moment. But we can also use poetry, drawing, music, and drama. So let's go to translanguaging. That's the next slide. Translanguaging, in short, is using all of your languages to communicate. And it's very natural in a multilingual community where people are speaking 2 or 3 languages for them to switch back and forth. We used to call it code switching, but code switching kind of is very limiting because you think of like a switch where we are in one language, then we're in the other, and it's not really switching back and forth like that. It's merging, and it's more like a river, using everything you've got. So I made up this little translanguaged text just to illustrate it. And I'll try to read it. It's using English and Portuguese. I've done a lot of translanguaging using English and Thai or English and Hungarian, but I'm going to try with English and Portuguese. So excuse my pronunciation and my attempt. Can you cant? My sister can canta. My brother can canta. Mas eu não canto. No, I can't. If I wanted to add in a third language, I could say, nee, je kan dat niet. That would be adding in Dutch. No, I can't. This kind of illustrates how you can take a word and play with it and use it and makes it easier to remember vocabulary, but you can do it with grammar. You can do it with pronunciation as well. Let's go to the next slide, and I'll show you how you can do it in poetry. You can write a poem just in English. A very simple poem I used to teach people to use in a class is just to take their name and do what is illustrated really on the left side. You take every letter and then you try to make a phrase or something, a poem that starts with that letter. So putting words on paper to express in part thoughts from me right to your heart. This is using all of the letters of poetry. And if I try with my own name, Leslie, and I translanguage it, I can get linguas evident. This one I owe it evidentemente seem learnable inglés especialmente. So there you can, I think, if I were doing this interactively, I would say, take your name right now, Elaine, and all the other people on this call, and try to write a translanguaged sentence or poem using your name. And you can use all of the languages that you know. Let's go to the next slide. I want to show you how to use drawing. And I see Isadora said she used translanguaging so many times. That's great. I think it's so effective. Drawing, I've never been a good artist, and some of that is because my older sister is very talented in art, so it was not something I tried to compete with. But if you do back-to-back drawings, if the students do back-to-back drawings, you don't have to at all be concerned about them. You have someone, and here I had switched this slide, but I'm going to give it to you. You have two students sit back to back the way the picture shows, and one of them will get a picture. It could be shown on a screen that only that one can see, or you could give them a paper with a picture on it. And the one who's going to draw should not be able to see the drawing. So that person has either their back to the screen or they have no paper. And now the speaker, the one who's looking at the picture, has to give instructions to the other student, the person who's going to draw, to explain and describe what should be drawn. But they can't use the words of the objects. So for example, if they want to have the other person draw the sun, they can't say, draw the sun. They have to say something like, draw a circle up in the top of the paper. And now put out lines out from that circle. Something like that. They can use words like left, right, bottom, above. They can use shapes. They can use inside, outside, large, small. And then at the end of this, the drawer will be drawing what the person tells them to draw. And then they will look at the picture when they are completely finished and see how close they came. This is a good activity because actually it does not depend on the student's drawing technique. It depends on the good instructions of the speaker. The person holding the picture, looking at the picture, has to give very clear instructions, which can help improve their English. And they might actually learn some other words like curvy, or if they don't know their shapes, if they're children, then things like square, triangle, rectangle, circle, and so forth. Let's go to the next one. We can have creativity with music as well. And here, I spent a lot of time in Asia, about 7 years, 3 years in Thailand and 4 years in Malaysia. And one of the things I noticed is that when people taught songs, they basically had the students read all of the words, memorize the words, say the words, sing the words, and that was it. And I think we can be a lot more creative with music. I think really what we need to do first is have students listen to a song, listen to it a couple of times, and write down or say the words they recognize. And then work in groups or in pairs to think about what the rest of the words might be that to fill in so that they've got the full song. And then you can discuss it. You can answer questions, maybe vocabulary or grammar, anything about the song that the students are curious about, and then sing the song. But that's not the end, because once they've sung the song the way it's written, the way it was originally composed, they now can write new verses. They can change words. They can add to the song. So I want you to listen to this next song, and I'm going to play it in a minute, but it's a very simple song. It's good for young children, but let's listen to it first, and then I will tell you what we go ahead and do.
Do you like broccoli? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Do you like ice cream? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Do you like broccoli ice cream? No, I don't. Yucky. Do you like donuts? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Do you like juice? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Do you like donut juice? No, I don't. Yucky. Do you like popcorn? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Do you like pizza? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Do you like popcorn pizza? No, I don't. Yucky. like bananas? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Do you like soup? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Do you like banana soup? No, I don't. Yuck!
Okay, thank you. You can turn it off because I think it keeps going. So what do you think about that song? First of all, there's a lot to talk about, but a few things that I used to work on with the groups in Thailand and Malaysia on is the fact that this can be taught to very young children. I have used it with preschoolers in Thailand who speak really very, very few words of English, but they do know all of these foods because most of these foods the words for them are in English around the world. Donut and ice cream and pizza. Well, pizza's Italian, but it also is in English. Interestingly, they learn juice and soup and so forth. But there's another thing, another vocabulary item that's rather interesting, and that's this word yucky, which I dislike as a word. I wish it wasn't in the song, but it has given me a chance actually to talk about it many times because it's the kind of word that a lot of children will use. Oh, I don't like that, it's yucky. And most of the time parents discourage them from using it and say, well, you may find it yucky, but I wish you would not, find a nicer way to say that you don't like it, like I don't care for it, or no, it's not my favorite thing. But yucky is kind of an impolite word. So it was surprising to me that it was actually in this song when I found it. There's a grammar thing here, which is wonderful. The do you like, yes, I do, no, I don't, constructions. You could teach that, you could drill it, and students might or might not remember it. But I found that when I taught it to first through third graders in Thailand, and I taught it to them in a one-time session, and then I was back there about 2 months later, and they all wanted the song, and they all remembered the construction. They remembered it very well. So I think this is a great song for teaching the do you, yes, I do, no, I don't, kind of construction. Now, I said you can be creative with songs. So look at number 5 here. You can put students in pairs or groups, or even do it individually. They could create new verses. They could add in Brazilian foods. Do you like goiabada? Do you like churrasco? Do you like requeijão? Do you like, and requeijão and soup, or, think of the other kinds of things that they could add. Do you like, what would be one? Goiabada pizza, maybe. I don't know, and the idea would be find 2 things that you like and then put them together, and the combination is maybe not so appealing. So there's creativity with music. Let's move on to the next slide. This creativity with drama, I don't want to spend much time with this because we're almost out of time, I think. And also my friend Joyce is spent decades using drama at Cultural in Porto Alegre with students. She has used, she did a thing with teenagers, Pink Confessions, where she had them discuss the problems that they had as if they were writing to some advice column and she uses puppets. She has this puppet, which is a grandmother puppet. She does it in Portuguese, but she also does it in English. And so you can use drama many, many different ways. And I don't want to elaborate on too many of them, but I think it's a great thing to do. Let's move on to one of the last slides. My summary here is, if you care about your students and if you are trying to adapt to their needs, you're already a great teacher. You should pat yourself on the back. Very few people say, oh, I'm a good doctor, I'm a good lawyer. Lawyers don't win all of their cases. Doctors don't do everything perfectly. Sometimes they make their stitches too large or whatever. But if you're caring, if you're trying, if you're adapting, you are a great teacher already. And we're all lifelong learners of our languages, all of our languages. So you're already a great English speaker. Let's go to the very last one. References, you can skip past that and see it later. And I want to ask questions. Have you got questions? ¿Cómo se acha? What are your questions? We can take it off the PowerPoint, I think, now. Time for discussion. Anybody coming in with questions? Should I be checking the chat, or are you monitoring the chat, Simara?
No, we are managing. Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Leslie. I have lots of questions, but I will leave it with Ellen first. Maybe you can give it the first kick, Ellen. What do you think?
Well, I was just checking the chat, and there are many, messages, comments, and they are all, congratulating Leslie and sending virtual hugs and stuff. But we haven't received any questions yet. So please, if you want to maybe share something.
I would love to hear if you've used translanguaging. I think Isadora said she's used translanguaging. This is something that I find very powerful because it releases everybody from the feeling that they have to stay in that one language. And, I really, years ago, people said, oh, you can't speak anything but the target language in the classroom. You must stay with, if it's a Spanish classroom, you have to stay with Spanish. If it's an English classroom, you have to stay with English. But our brains don't work that way. Our brains are active in every language all the time. So even if you're telling students they cannot speak another language, they're thinking in that other language, and then you're not letting them express what they're thinking. And that's a problem, right? So I think we have to free ourselves from that and just, say, hey, I'm good enough, I mean, my Portuguese is nowhere near perfect, but I just go with it,
Yeah, I can see that, especially not only teachers, but also adult students, they are really afraid of speaking because they want to be perfect.
Yes.
And they are not perfect in Portuguese. But I guess it's something cultural, since we live in a huge country like Brazil, and we only speak one language. And this is, I think most Brazilians, when they go abroad, they get terrified because people can manage speaking other languages, and sometimes they are not afraid to try. And culturally, I can see that Brazilians, they get stuck, even if they've been studying a lot, like a teacher that sometimes has already graduated, they are still afraid. And sometimes it seems to me that they are afraid of meeting some student that could speak more, I don't know, fluently than themselves. And because we know that kids, they have a lot of input from media and movies and television and whatever, and sometimes they can manage it very well. But of course, I think especially teachers that are starting, they must be confident, because they have a lot to teach, always, not only language, but also, I don't know, strategies, games, and learn how to have fun learning a new language.
But it's not just Brazilians, because I think it's there are many cultures where people are afraid to, and adults especially. I agree. I think that's what I have found. Adults, they're so they've grown up, and they feel as a grown up that they must be in control.
Mm-hmm.
They must not lose control of their life, of what's happening around them, and that need to control the situation causes them to freeze up. And it's true of a lot of university students as well. Less true with children, but it can be true with children. My own daughter, when we lived in China, she was 11 and she turned 12, and she froze up. I mean, people started correcting her, and then she stopped speaking. And she was passively learning through the year, but she didn't speak it until actually she left China. When she left China, she started speaking Chinese. I mean, go figure, But it was because there was nobody that was going to, correct her, I think. And I think my advantage as a learner is I don't try to be a grown-up in another culture. I realize I'm not even 5 years old in a new culture. I'm maybe 2 or 3. I don't know how to cross a street. I don't know how to go to the bathroom in a lot of cultures. I don't know how to eat. I'm a toddler. I'm a very young child. And my hope as I'm there longer is that I get to be 6 or 7 years old, But it's also, for me, it's very freeing. I feel I can be the learner, and I don't have to be perfect. I don't, it doesn't worry me that I'm not in control. But many people, it does. They absolutely want to be, they're too afraid to lose control. And I think that's difficult. It's a much more difficult path. I don't know what causes it, if it's part of our personality or what, but I see it in a lot of people from the US and a lot of people in Thailand, a lot of cultures really.
Okay.
That was very interesting. There is an author, Julia Kristeva. Don't know if you know her, Leslie.
Mm-hmm.
She's a French author, I believe. I have the English version of her book, Strangers for Ourselves. And she talks about the foreignhood, the strangerhood. And it's very interesting. That works with language, works with culture as a whole. And she says that as foreigners, we see ourselves like the other. We don't see only the other ones as, okay, I'm integrating or not integrating in another culture, but ourselves as the other. So we give ourselves permission to do things we wouldn't do at home. It's so true. And with language as well. Why do I need to speak English? I learned English as an adult. The same way as I use Portuguese. And why do I need to speak or try to speak English like you? You are a native speaker of English. I will never speak English like you. And that's fine. And that's okay. And sometimes students, they want adults, they want to push themselves. They need to know, they have a kind of an idea that one day they will speak like a native speaker. That gets very frustrating when they spend 2, 3, 4 years and studying and they don't achieve that, mainly depending on the approach. So sometimes the approach is just correcting a language or correcting language, so that they will never work. So I found amazing what you said. I could see many students kind of the same situation. Yeah.
And
Lovely.
I mean, another thing is you can't speak like somebody else. I mean, I speak English the way I speak English, but I could never speak English the way King Charles of the UK speaks it, or the way some other famous person speaks it, even another New Yorker. I mean, I speak it. We all speak our own very individual. I can't even speak it the way my sister does. And I grew up with her. I mean, she was always in my life. She's my older sister, but I could try to imitate her, but that would be insulting, I think. And, when I try to speak another language, I try to get as close as I can to an understandable pronunciation from multiple people. I'm not trying to sound like one of them, a specific one, like one teacher or something. I'm trying to sound like, a lot of the input that I have. And I'll often just imitate, I remember the first time I was in Brazil, and I didn't speak any Portuguese at that point. I was there for 6 days, I think. And the very first day, the mother of the host family, it was partners, was on the phone, and I was sitting in the living room with the 11-year-old daughter, and she was watching TV, novelas, and but the mother was like ta, 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 and I'm like, what is this ta? Well, I mean, and so I kept listening to it, and of course it's está, and I mean it's like, and it's a back channel, what we call in linguistics a back channel, as you're listening to somebody and you're like, yeah, in English, or okay. But I had no idea. So you have to kind of listen, I think, hard in order to improve your language. But you're not going to sound like somebody else. You're going to sound like yourself in that other language.
And you know that nowadays, if you, for example, if you type on YouTube English lesson, for example, you start receiving many ads of people trying to teach you things like speak as an American, speak as a British person. Don't say that. Say like this. You want to learn these tips? So buy my course. It's a new kind of product they are creating, and I think this is something that gets students even more worried about how much they speak English, because they show something like slang or some expression from a particular place, and then they think, but I've never heard this before. I'm not ready. I need to study more and more and more and buy all these courses to be successful, And I get so angry with that, because this is not...
It's an illusion. It's an illusion that people create. And when you go abroad, me and you, Ellie, not you, Leslie, when you go abroad and we start talking, they say, what country in Latin America are you from? We are Latin Americans. People generally, the accent shows, and that's something that the people create for them to have some money, probably.
The oddest thing happened to me once, that a guy came to me. I was speaking in English to an American girl in Chile, and the guy came to me speaking Russian. And he said, I bet you were Russian. And I told, I'm Brazilian. So it was really weird, because, he was trying to read my accent, and it is fun. And then when I said I'm Brazilian, he was like, oh, I can't believe. And we had a very long conversation according to the, language variation and linguistics and sounds. It was so cool.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times people think because of the way you look that you're a certain nationality. I mean, blonde hair could very well be Russian, but that's happened. My husband, when we lived in China, everyone thought he was Russian because he had a beard and he's tall and big, and now he's Anglo-Saxon. I mean, his family comes from England and Germany, and but they think everyone who is kind of European looking speaks English. And I know that that's very common in Asia, that, if someone looks Brazilian, if they look, lighter skinned, they're going to go up to them and try to practice their English. I mean, it's okay because a lot of people speak English, but it's sort of a big assumption that everybody in the world does, because there are many speakers of other languages, and very often they run into somebody that doesn't speak a word of English. Are there other questions coming in yet? Or
some other, let me show you here. Luciani is greeting you, and
Oi, Luciani.
I guess we don't have any question, but it's high time we have to finish. We are 101 here. So Leslie, it was a pleasure to have you here in this session it's the last one online for this year. Yeah, the next one will be at the IFRS. Yes, and then we are still we are still getting the structure to have a live how do we call it? Broadcasting. Yeah, we want to broadcast, but this is completely new, and we don't have all the equipment yet, but we'll handle that. And then on December 1st, is that all right, Simara? December 1st?
Yes, I don't know. Isa is the one who is giving us the technical support, Isadora.
Yeah.
If you could show us on the screen the banner for the event, I think it would be interesting to share here. But if not, we are going to send to the ones who subscribed, for the ones who registered for the event, so we can send via email. But if Isadora could show it to us, that would be great as well. Anyway, it's going to be on the 1st of December. We will have the pleasure to meet Leslie in person at Canoas campus of the Federal Institute of Education, Science and Technology of Rio Grande do Sul, EFRS, as you said, Ellen. It's in Canoas. So the ones who live in Rio Grande do Sul, the ones who live in the metropolitan area, and the ones who live in São Francisco de Paula, Ellen, they can come and join us. That would be great.
I will.
And we are going to talk later with Leslie, but it's maybe a little bit more designed for English teachers, but not restricted to them. So if you want to think a little bit wider on English as a second language and how to improve it, we'll have Leslie to talk to us, to chat. It's not going to be a lecture. We are going to have a chat there, a dialogue on how to work better with it. And the teachers there at the campus, they are already looking forward to this moment. I'm sure we will learn a lot, as we did today with you. And thank you, Leslie, for the wonderful lecture you've just given to us.
Thank you.
Thank you again. And well, as Simara said, we are looking forward to seeing you in person there and having you here in Rio Grande do Sul for some time. Yeah. And I hope at the end of this program that we created in order to embrace our English lovers and English teachers. We can have feedback, some feedbacks from all people who joined us along the year, and think about the next year. Think about what we are going to provide next year for our teachers. If it's going to be online courses again, if we are going to have interchange programs, if we are having maybe some sessions around the state. Yes, because there are people from all over Rio Grande do Sul that have joined our sessions. So this is something that we are going to build together. So to the ones that are in our WhatsApp group, if you have anything that you would add, any suggestion, any idea, please, you might leave your messages there, and we are going to keep discussing in order to create a good program for next year. Yes, we really want Gaúchos teachers get closer, and we can develop together, and make it fun too. Yes, it's all of our lectures, they showed us how to have fun while teaching, and this is awesome. Yeah, so if someone that is watching this haven't watched the other sessions, you can check on Partners YouTube. Everything is there. Very well organized by our team, and I want to thank our team, Lucas, now Isadora, and Andrea, that used to join us as well. So, well, that's it. I want that these sessions in this year were just the beginning of something greater, and we can keep exchanging experience, ideas, and develop together. Thank you a lot, Leslie. Thank you, Samara.
Thank you, Leslie. It was a pleasure.
My
And
pleasure.
that's it, guys. Good evening, you all, and see you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.